Hello and welcome to tonight's event, The Backstory, with local author Linda Smolkin. Before we get started with tonight's author talk, I want to remind the audience that you can join the conversation at any time. Linda says she loves questions, so if you have a question or comment for Linda, please feel free to put it in the chat box or Q&A box at any point during tonight's discussion. I'll pepper in the questions as we go. Now I would like to take a moment to introduce tonight's author, Linda Smolkin. Linda always wanted to be a writer ever since she saw her first TV commercial and wondered how to pen those clever ads. She got her degree in journalism and became a copywriter. Linda landed a job at an advertising agency where she worked for several years before joining the nonprofit world. She's the author of Among the Branded and The Secret We Lost, and currently working on her third novel. When not in front of the computer, she's behind the drums, escaping into her pretend rock star world. Please join me in welcoming Linda Smolkin.
Hi, Hannah. Glad to be here.
Thank you so much for taking the time.
Thank you. Great intro.
So I'm going to just jump right in with our first question. And I just want to reiterate to the audience, if you would like to ask a question tonight, feel free to put that in the chat box or the Q&A box, and I will make sure to relay your questions to Linda. So my first question for you, Linda, is how did you get into writing?
Well, as you can tell from the intro, I always wanted to be a writer. I was really about 10 and grew up a lot with the TV on. My parents didn't care much. The TV was on all the time. If I wasn't out riding my bike, I was hanging out at home watching TV, and just remember seeing the commercials. And I at the time, I didn't know that it was called copywriting, when you write ads and slogans and all the copy for TV spots or print advertising. And so that was around 10-ish, and it was always on my mind. And then after I graduated high school, I went to college and pursued that. I got a degree in journalism with a concentration in advertising, because that was the way you had to go about it. They didn't have a separate advertising or copywriting degree. So I went to the University of Maryland, got my journalism degree with a concentration in advertising and a minor in English. And I got an internship at an ad agency. And then my first job was at a department store in their advertising department, writing all kinds of fun ads. And that's kind of how I started. And I've continued to do that full time, no longer at a department store or ad agency. I'm a nonprofit now, but I'm still doing the same type of writing. And that's what I do full time. And then I write my novels around my job on the weekends or before work or after work.
How do you balance writing with a full-time job?
Discipline, a lot of discipline. I set up sort of my own rules, and I change them depending on what works. So for my first couple of novels, I wrote mostly after work. And there was a portion of my professional life where I was a consultant or a freelance writer for about 12 years. So I worked a little less, but still, at least 30 hours a week. So it wasn't any easier, but I could figure out a little more. It was a little easier to figure out when I could fit it in. Then I, went to work full time, and it was a little more challenging, but it was mostly after work and on weekends. And when I started writing the third book, which is coming out later this fall, I was a little older, more tired, and I found that it was really hard to write after work. So I had to kind of change the routine. So I started writing a little bit in the morning before work, just a little bit, like half an hour, and that helped a lot. And then I would do a little bit more after work, because I had already started what I needed to write for that day. And then I would spend a lot of time on the weekends. I would get up and go somewhere and sit and write for about 4 hours each day on the weekends. And I got a lot done quickly because I was able to get up in the morning and then work on weekends. So that's kind of how I go about it. And also I now have a routine that I didn't have before, and that's, I'm saying this and it's recorded so I can say, you said this. I don't, or I try not to turn on the TV or Netflix or anything like that Monday through Thursday. So those nights I spend either writing or editing or working on something related to book stuff. And of course I break my rules, and of course will go and watch a YouTube video here or there, but I really try to be disciplined. And I do take a break between my day job and the writing. I go and I drum, and that really helps to just have some sort of exercise or just get away from it for a little bit while I'm doing something I love. And then I come back to it. So discipline and just taking it like one day at a time, and not trying to be too overwhelmed with the fact that, oh my goodness, I have to write another entire book. How am I going to get through it? But just, okay, I'm going to do this today, and then I move on, and just try to be focused on that particular moment of writing.
I want to ask a little bit more about the process when you're actually developing a story. Do you start with like a solid outline and generally know where the story is going, or do you kind of let the story evolve as you write it?
Definitely an outline. And that takes quite a while. It takes a few months to do an outline. And my outline is basically just, that's the one thing I handwrite. I'll handwrite all outlines. Well, first I get the idea, and then which I get a lot of, but then the ones that actually will stick out of, like a lot of ideas, one will stick, I hope. And then I run with that, and then I start thinking about the characters, how old they are, what do they do, who's in their life, what's going on with them, and develop them a little. It's not to the point where I know what they're eating for breakfast and all that. I don't get into that kind of stuff, but who they are and why they might be motivated to do certain things or react a certain way. And then once I have that, I'll create the outline, and it's basically handwritten, and it's, very kind of simple. It might be, she's at work and she talks to George about this, and then that becomes a scene, which then becomes a chapter. So it's for the fourth book that I'm working, I just finished the outline for the fourth book, and that was many, many pages because you just wind up having a lot of scenes. So yes, I have an outline, and I work on that for a few months. And then once that's done, I try to tackle the book. I try not to I give myself reasonable goals. I try to say, okay, just if you don't write every day, it's not the end of the world, but if I can write 500 words a day, then it's possible I can get a draft done within 5 to 6 months. And then from that, I can add to it, I can develop it, I can make it better, but at least I have something I can work with. But it would go much slower if I didn't have an outline. So that really helps me. And then in between the writing, the outline and the writing, I'm thinking about it, because I think that's a big part of writing that people don't realize. There's a lot of thinking going on when you're not writing. That really helps when you actually sit down to write.
So we talked a little bit about your process. I want to talk a little bit about influences. So both of your published novels, I don't know about the one you're finishing now, but both of your published novels heavily feature European and specifically Russian culture. In among the branded, Svetva is a Russian immigrant, and The Secret We Lost heavily features Russia as a setting. Can you talk to us a little bit about your influences?
Yeah, I have not always, but since probably in my 20s, I've been fascinated with Russian culture. I don't know why. I don't really know why, but I always have been fascinated with it. And so that's part of it. I always wanted to like learn more and learn about it. And then many, many years ago, I had a coworker when I worked in advertising who sat across from me, and she was telling me she was quitting her job and she was going to go back to study Russian literature, and she wanted to be a teacher or something. I don't remember the exact story because that was so long ago, but she was going to leave and change careers, but she was going to be, part of it was being an exchange teacher in Russia. And I'm like, oh, that sounds really interesting. And so she told me a little bit more about it, and she wound up leaving. And then at some point I was like, that sounds really interesting. I'm going to look into it. And at the same time, I was teaching English as a second language, and a lot of my students were from Russia. And so that kind of happened at the same time. And when I looked into the program, I thought, that sounds really interesting. And it, was, I think, 28. And I didn't really, I had a full-time job but no other real responsibilities. So I said, let me apply and see if I can go to be an exchange teacher. Even though I wasn't a professional teacher, I was teaching English. And they, rejected me. They rejected me they get a lot of applications. So I said, okay, that's fine. So I applied again the next time around, and they accepted me. So I quit my job and I went to St. Petersburg for 9 months, and I taught English at a university there, and I kept a journal. So in my second book, Secret We Lost, I referred to my journal for a lot of the scenes where she lived when she went there. So that really helped a lot. So I always had an interest in it, and going there gave me the opportunity to be able to write a little bit better those scenes. I still had to go on YouTube and remember what Red Square looked like many years later and to get a feel for those things. But it just, the influence is part of my life, but the interest in it, I'm not exactly sure where it came from. Just people coming into my life at certain times, I think.
It sounds like you really write what you know.
I don't know how people write what they don't know. I'm in awe of those people that make up all these worlds. Yes, it's a talent, a skill. If I write what I don't know, I have to really spend a lot of time researching it. And for Among the Branded, I did spend a lot of time researching certain aspects of the book. Those scenes where she's pitching to clients, for example, or in front of people, that kind of comes from experience, because I know that the advertising world, I know what it's like to have that environment and to pitch for a client, and all the jargon for that. But the other stuff like uniforms, military stuff, all that, learning about Germans during the war and all that, I had to research a lot of that. But it was interesting.
Let's dive a little bit more into Among the Branded. So for those of you in the audience who don't know, Among the Branded is available for checkout from your local public library and also available for purchase. I put the link to Linda's website in the chat box, but Among the Branded is about a woman who discovers letters written by a Jewish woman during the Holocaust. And she goes on a mission to see if the little boy mentioned in the letters is still alive. She goes on to form a close relationship with Izzy, who is a Holocaust survivor. The book tackles big questions surrounding personal beliefs and morality, and you touch on American neo-Nazis in the book. The book also came out in May 2017, just a couple of months prior to the Unite the Right rally in Charlottesville. You really hit upon some timely themes and questions in the novel, and I was just wondering what inspired this plot, and when did you start writing the novel, and did current events influence you as you wrote?
That's a really good question. And at the time, it seems like it was very timely and almost planned, but it wasn't, because obviously those events happened after the book came out, but it's kind of very timely. It's just how this all happened. But as far as influences, why I decided to write this book, uh, I I wrote the outline probably in around 2012, and then I started writing in about 2013, and it took me a while to write it, and then I had to rewrite it and edit it, and that whole process from the moment I outlined to when it was published was probably about 4 years, because there was a lot of work to do. At the time, I knew I wanted to write a contemporary story, and I wanted it to be about something someone stood up for and something that someone believed in. And I kind of just went through different ideas in my head. Well, what is something someone could stand up for? And it'd be cool if it happened in the workplace. If someone had to stand up for something in the workplace, and they have to, choose between perhaps their job or saying something that she knew. And that's basically how it came about. And then I just kind of ran with it and developed the story. And I thought, well, how can I get to that point? Something has to happen, or some characters have to be in there to make her feel a certain way, because my main character is not Jewish. So when she finds this letter, what's the motivating factor? She didn't have any family that's who's Jewish, and so she needed some motivation. So that's when I thought of, well, maybe she meets somebody, and that somebody changes her life. And then that's how it all started. So there's the letter, and then there's Izzy, and then they become very friendly, and that's how it all came about. But it's very interesting that, and it's still very timely. Like when I think about the story, just not to go into any detail, but it's just still very timely with what's going on now.
Given the representation of American neo-Nazis in the book and the current events that popped up right after you published, if you were writing Among the Branded today, would you change any part of the story or go about it any differently?
Also a really good question. And that's something that I've thought about quite a few times. Did my main character, Stephanie, act the right way? Did she do the right things? And my stories are very character driven and not, like thrillers and suspense stories are a lot more plot driven. So there's a lot more plot twists and a lot of like crazy stuff going on. And my stories are there's plenty of stuff going on, but just a little more quiet and more character driven. So even though I may have wanted her to do something a little differently, I think she did the right thing. And that was the only thing that I was, thinking about that could be possibly different. But then I decided it's not in her character to do it any other way, especially because she had a lot, to deal with in terms of it wasn't her business. She couldn't really make the decision. She had to go to her boss about it, but she still wanted to stand up and do something. So I had her come up with a creative way to deal with it, which was a little more quiet. In a roundabout way, to answer your question, I don't think I would change anything. And I've said this before, that once I put a book out there, it belongs to the readers. So I would love, and I love when I hear from readers, what they think. Do they think what she did was the right thing? And it's an interesting conversation to have during a book discussion too, because also we want to do certain things in our life, but when we're put in those situations, how really are we going to act when we're depending on our certain livelihood, our jobs, or how are we going to stand up for something we believe in if it's going to jeopardize our own situation? So I'm going to leave it up to the readers to decide if anything should be changed.
think that's a great answer. I know it's a little bit of a loaded question, but I appreciate you taking the time to answer it. Lon has written in with an audience question. So audience, if you have other questions, feel free to write in. Lon writes, where and how did the idea for the plot come from? We talked about that a little bit just now with Among the Branded, but let me expand upon Lon's question a little bit. As you go from book to book, as you wrote your second, your third, and it sounds like you're outlining a fourth, do you find your process for getting ideas is typically the same? Does it change?
Oh, getting ideas. I was talking about this not too long ago. Getting ideas is really easy. I have ideas all the time, but the biggest issue is, will it stick? Can it be, a 300-page book? Now, so my book's usually around 275 pages, so on the shorter side, but in general, it's, are they going to make a story and make a book? And, I'm very interested in a lot of different things, family, friendship, moral dilemmas, the grieving process. So for some reason, my ideas tend to be around those. And a lot about dilemmas, like moral dilemmas. And that's what, I'm dealing with right now in the fourth book, but, and the third book also, but especially in the first book, there's that moral dilemma. For ideas, basically, I have a whole notebook of them, but then I start thinking about them and I don't think they're all not going to make a story, because it's like, okay, so what? So she does this, but why? And why is it? There aren't that, if you read books, there aren't that many new ideas. It's just how you approach them and what the characters will do and what's unique about it. Maybe it's the writing that's unique, or maybe it's that particular character that's unique. And again, my stories are very, character driven. So I spend a lot of time trying to develop those, especially in the second book, Secret We Lost, is very, very character driven. And that one, for example, if we want to talk about like ideas, so the idea for that one was, you have, it's a story about 3 generations and a secret that might tear them apart. And for that idea, I thought, usually when someone has a secret and only 2 people know about it and one person dies, you never want to tell your secret, right? You hope, the secret will die with the person. But in this case, I kind of flipped it. Well, the only other person who knows the secret dies. And now, because of that, she wants to confess to somebody who's very important to her. So that was that idea. So from that, I went, okay, I've got this idea now, what do I do with it? And then I could see it being a story. And then I outlined it and realized, yes, I can make a story out of it. So I think a lot of people probably do have great book ideas, just have to sit down and see if any of them will stick. I hope that answers the question.
Yeah, please write in if it didn't, and we can always revisit. All right, so you've written 2 novels, and it sounds like actually you've written 3. The third one's just not out yet. And there was a really tight turnaround between your first 2 novels. Among the Branded came out in 2017, and The Secret We Lost came out a year later in 2018. How did your process change from the first book to the second? Do you think writing gets easier the more you do it, or does it really depend on the novel?
So a little tidbit, and I hope I don't confuse anybody. My second book, The Secret We Lost, I actually wrote first. But while I was querying, because I originally wanted to be traditionally published, while I was querying, I wrote Among the Branded. And when I decided to self-publish, after, it was probably a couple years or 3 years later, or maybe more, it was around 2009 or 10 when I was querying Secret We Lost, I decided, so during that time, because it's a very long process for people who want to traditionally publish to get an agent, usually it's a very long process of querying, and then if they want to see your work, then you have to send it, and then months can go by. So months can turn into a year or two. So during that time, while I waited and queried and kept querying agents, I wrote another book, and that book was Among the Branded. So when it came time to make a decision to self-publish, I thought Among the Branded was a little farther along when I went back to look at The Secret We Lost. So The Secret We Lost at that time had a different title, and I wanted rewriting half of the book, most of the last half of the book. And then that became The Secret We Lost, and that was my second published book. So it was still a lot of time between the books, but it just seemed shorter because I'd already written my second book, but I revised a lot of it. To answer your question about does it go any easier, I think I was thinking about this the other day. I think knowing what makes a good book is easier for me. I know what needs to be done, but the actual doing it is not any easier. It's still hard. It's still hard to put my rear end in the chair and write day in and day out after working, a full-time job. It's hard to, I know exactly what's needed, but then I send it to my editor and she tells me all the stuff that still needs to be done. And I knew it all along, but it's hard. So to answer your question, I think getting through the draft is a little easier, just that part of it. But then the editing and the revisions, it's not any easier, because I think that's where most of my work needs to be done. And so I'm being lazy in the draft, knowing that I have 10 more drafts to work on to get it to where it needs to be before it's published.
We have an audience question from Christine. Christine writes, you just mentioned that you changed a title. At what point do you develop a book title, and how does that come about? How do you know when it needs to change?
Oh, I love titles. I make a list of them. And usually when I start a book, I have a working title just to give it a name. And Among the Branded wasn't the first title of the book. It had a different title. And then during the process, like I said, I wrote down a bunch of titles, just some things that come to me. And then one day I'm driving in the car. A lot of things, during the pandemic, I haven't been driving as much, but pre-COVID, I was in the car quite a bit, and a lot of ideas come to me when I'm in the car or walking or listening to music. And one day I'm driving, I parked the car, and I'm like, Among the Branded, that's it. That's the title of the book. It just made sense for the story, made sense with, things going on with the Holocaust, with the fact that she worked at a branding and design firm. Perfect. So The Secret We Lost, that wasn't the title. I had a working title for that. And I don't honestly know how that one came to me, except it was on a list, and that was the one I chose, and I really, really liked it. And the third book, I think also, I definitely had a list. And then when I heard this one, and when I came up with this one, I'm like, this is it. This is the title. And for the fourth book, which I won't talk that much about because just starting it, I really like the title, the working title of it, because there's something going on in the story that it's perfect for, I think. So I'm betting that's going to be it.
Well, with an answer like that, you forced me to ask, will you share the title of the third book with us?
Yes. It's called Love the Way They Lie.
Love the Way They Lie. And what about the fourth book? Do you want to share the title you really love? Or
not yet, because if it changes, no, not yet. I will share what Among the Branded was. That was called Last Letter from Gers. And if you read the story, that Gers is a detention camp in France during World War II. And what was The Secret We Lost? It was Secret We Lost was the arrival of Elsa. And that changed too. So I will share. So I've shared that. Yeah. And then there were other cool names, but not, like they're like ideas. We have a lot of them.
You throw them out and see what sticks.
Yeah.
All right. So both of your books that you've published so far, self-published. Is your third book also going to be self-published?
Yeah.
Can you talk a little bit about how you made the decision to self-publish and what that process was like? What are some of the advantages of self-publishing, and would you recommend aspiring authors to try self-publishing?
Sure. Originally, I wanted to traditionally publish. As I mentioned, I spent quite a 2 or 3 years querying, and then in the process was working on another book, which was fine because I had plenty of time while waiting. I queried a lot. I think a total of maybe about 300 agents, and there were several who liked it, wanted to read the manuscript. There was one who requested some changes. I sent it back. She wound up passing. That's what it's called. They pass. There were things they liked, and then some things they didn't like. And one day I said, I'm going to send one more query out for Monda Brandon, and just I'll make a decision after that what to do. And I'll never forget it because that was what made me decide to publish it. The agent got back to me. She was one that wanted to see the full, and she read it, and she got back to me and said, there's so much to like about the book, but I think it's a little controversial with the subject that you're dealing with. So I thought about it. I said, well, I thought to myself, it's the readers to decide. And so that was what made me decide to self-publish, because I felt I had a story to tell. And I think that I give that advice sometimes to people. If you have a story in your head or that you've written and you can't stop thinking about it, you really need to share it. And that was the only thing that stopped her. It wasn't the writing. It wasn't the character. It wasn't anything except she thought it was a little controversial. And I said, I need to tell this story. And that's when I decided to self-publish it. And then I actually wound up getting an agent after that, and we've since parted ways, but I published and then got an agent who was representing me for a while. But that's how it started. And I think as far as advice on, was that the other question, on advice on whether someone should self-publish or not? I think it really depends. With any kind of publishing, self or traditional, it's a long process. And if you self-publish, you should definitely go and do the steps and the processes of what traditionally published authors do. Get an editor, do it professionally. So there's money up front that you have to spend, but to put out a good book, you need to hire an editor. It just it's necessary. I think it depends on what you want. With a traditionally published author, you don't have to put any money out at the beginning. You have an editor from your publishing house, that you're, I guess, assigned, and it's a great process. For self-publishing, I like it. I get to work with the formatter, the editor, the designer, but I won't lie, it's hard. But being an author, any kind of author, you have to put in the work. It's challenging. And even with traditionally published authors, you have to market your work too, and get exposure for your work. So it's the same. It's just you're putting a little more money up front when you're a self-published author.
Lon wrote in asking about your editing process.
Okay.
How many times do you self-edit before sending your finished manuscript to an editor? And how did you find your editor?
Oh, okay. I've had a couple different editors. I had one on the first and second book. I had a different one on the third book. I found them, I can't remember, I think through the third one through a Facebook writing group. She's also an author and an editor, and she's amazing. She's an amazing author and editor. So that's how I found her. And the process is I write the draft, like I said, the crappy draft, and then I work on it some more, probably about 3 more rounds. And at the same time, or around the same time, I'm also sending it to what I call beta readers or advanced readers. I have about 5 people. They're awesome. They will read my books and give me feedback. And during that time, I will also send it to the editor. And I think it's ready for the editor. And it turns out there's a lot more work to be done because they're looking at it differently. They haven't seen it before. They're picking out a lot of issues and things that I would need to work on. And my editor for the third book, she gave me a developmental letter, which is separate. And then she did line edits within the document. And the letter basically says everything that needs to be fixed. And she goes over character development, setting, plot, timing, narration, dialogue, all of it. And she basically tells me what still needs to be fixed. And she'll tell me what she liked about it, but it's mainly what needs to be fixed. And so I take a couple weeks to try to figure things out, because when you get it back from the editor, if you ask most authors, they don't, they need a break before they jump in, because there's always a lot to fix. And then once I figure out how to fix it, and there are some things, for example, where my editor said, that simply is not going to work. You have to move it to another book or take it out. Well, I'm thinking, how am I going to move it? So you have to think of those things for a while, figure out how it's going to work, and then get your butt back in the chair and fix it. And that takes a while. That can take probably as long as doing the draft. And then my editor will take a second look. So she took a second look after that and then gave me feedback. So I would say it's at least 10 rounds, and some of them, only 2 of them are probably like, I want to, change a little bit, but most of them are serious, heavy duty revisions. And that's why it takes forever.
We have a couple great questions from Seema. So Seema writes in, when you send in a query letter, do you send in the first chapter, or is it a sample couple of paragraphs, a chapter from the middle so they can see how the character developed? What are you sending when you send a query letter?
Usually it's always the beginning, but it also depends on how much, and it also depends on the specs. Every agent is different. So I would recommend, once you've made your list of, agents that you want, depending on the genre that you work in, because some agents only do certain genres. Once you've made your list and done your research, then I would recommend going to the website and seeing what their requirements are for the submission process. Some only want a query letter, which is similar to what you'd find on the back flap of a book, to entice them to ask for more, and usually tell what the genre is, how long the book is, what your experience is with writing, or anything that would be helpful for them to know. And then their website will probably always say what they want to include. So sometimes it might just be the query. Some agents want the first 10 pages. Some agents want the first chapter. Some agents want the first 50 pages. So it all depends. And sometimes I think some agents want the first 50 pages because a lot of us try to make the first chapter good, really good. And then but we really need to work on the whole book, not just the first chapter. So that's the recommendation. I would say go to the website and check their specifications to find out.
Seema has a follow-up question. Are you still sending queries out, or are you sticking exclusively with self-publishing?
Good question. So the third book I sent, I was thinking I think ideally for me, it would be hybrid, where I self-publish and maybe also traditionally publish. So for the third book, I queried again some, and that's why there was a little, if I hadn't queried to consider traditionally published, I probably would have released it sooner, but I gave myself some time to do that. And again, I had some interest, and there was one or two that wanted to read the full. I didn't query like 300 like I did last time, but I did send some out, and a couple that looked and wanted to look at the full, they wound up passing. So I decided, I like the book. I have a story to share, and I think actually I really love the story. So I'm gonna self-publish it this time. What I do with the fourth one, I'm not sure. I might try to traditionally, publish. That is a very long process. Once you get the agent, then they have to query to publishing houses, and then it's usually, when you get a contract, it's usually a year and a half to 2 years before it comes out. So it's a long process, but if you want to go the traditional route, that's definitely the way to go to start querying.
So let's talk a little bit about your next project. What can you tell us about the book you have coming out in the fall?
Sure. As I mentioned, it's called Love the Way They Lie. It's contemporary fiction. It's coming out probably sometime in November or December. And it's about a woman in her 30s. Her name is Maggie, and everything seems to be going just fine until over the course of several months, she discovers quite a few people in her life are lying to her. And she has to decide what lies are acceptable, including the one that she winds up telling in order to live the life that she wants to live. And for that, I kind of had the idea while I was driving a couple of years ago, the whole idea of what lies are forgivable and or acceptable, because, we as individuals have to decide that, so that's the book. It's like I said, coming out this fall, and I'm really, really excited about it.
We have a late breaking audience question from Long. To the rest of our audience, I just want to say, if you'd like to ask a question, now's your chance. Take a moment while Linda answers this one to ask yours. So Lon writes, about queries, do you send simultaneous queries?
Yes, absolutely. If someone's asking you not to do that, that's unusual. But you want to probably, my opinion is not to send out like 100 at a time, maybe 10, maybe 15, just to get a feel for it, to see what kind of feedback you're getting, to see like, well, maybe your query needs to be tweaked a little bit, make it a little bit more enticing, or shorten it up or something like that. But I would not do one and wait to hear back, because often, and that's another thing you can find out from the website. Some will say on the website, you only hear from us if we're interested. So since you won't know, and it could take, a lot of people want to write books, and a lot of people are searching for agents. And I would say definitely, my opinion is, don't wait. Go ahead and query more than one agent at a time. But I would say make sure you do your homework, because it saves you a lot of time. Even though it's a lot of upfront work, it saves you a lot of time if you're not, querying. If you write sci-fi, but you're querying someone who only wants romance novels, you've spent time querying the wrong person.
Jeffrey has written in asking, have you done any audiobooks? What do you think audiobooks are a requirement these days if you're publishing?
Oh, yes, good question. I do have an audiobook. It came out in July after all these years for Amanda Branded, and the narrator did a beautiful job. She of all the voices. I was just so blown away, and it sounds great in audio. And if anybody likes to read audiobooks, it is available on Audible. Go to Amazon, you can find it. It's about 8.5 hours long, and it's there, whether or not you have a membership or not. Anyway, I'm answering this in a roundabout way. Yes, I do have an audiobook for that one. I haven't done any others. I think it depends. A lot of people love reading or listening to books, and it's great for if you're driving or on your walk or, whatever. So yes, I say go out and get the audiobook.
So Christine also wrote in asking about the audiobook. And Christine wrote, what was that process like? Did you get to pick the narrator? Did you get to make any like directorial decisions? How did this happen?
Oh, yeah. Yeah, that's a great question. I did because I own the rights. I could go on to what's called ACX, which is the people who do the production behind Audible, and I could put up a new project and have people submit auditions. And I did. So I got quite a few. I don't remember, about 15 or 16 people auditioning, and it was really hard because there were a few people who were really good, but this one really stood out to me. And so yeah, what I do is I put up the proposal with a sample, and what I did for the samples, I took a little, just like a page from a few different chapters so I can hear the different voices, because Svetlana is a main character in the book and she has a Russian accent, and I had to get that right, or the narrator had to get that right. And then Izzy also, I had to get the right Izzy, or it just wouldn't be among the branded. So when I listened and I heard all of them, then I narrowed it down to about 3, and then I chose. And then after that, it took, I think, from the moment I listed the project to the actual final, book, an audiobook, it was, I want to say, between 2 and 3 months. So it definitely is a process, because once the way she did is, when we said go ahead, then she gave me a 15-minute sample, and that was pretty much the only time that I could make changes. But it'd be really a hard process if I came in later and said, can you change this? I mean, so that's how it worked. And then she finished the book and sent it off to her editor to, I guess, master it. And then it was done, and it turned out really beautifully. And I like the process, but it was really hard when I got the auditions and had to choose. So there were so much amazing talent.
We have another audience question from Colleen. Colleen, I know, is somebody who is writing and is interested in publishing someday, and she's having a hard time finding an editor. Do you have editors that you recommend to people? I know that you said that you found your editor on a Facebook group, but what advice do you have for Colleen?
I would probably need to know a little bit more about what the difficulties are, and if they've worked with someone in the past and they didn't particularly like that editor, what was it that they didn't like about them? I like my editor because I like that she gives me line edits in the document, but also developmental letter to share with me her thoughts on why, what needs to change in addition to the line edits that she made. She's also incredibly honest. And so I would probably need to know more if she wants to put in the chat or a question a little bit more, the difficulties, and I'm happy to try to answer it better.
So that was the last audience question I had. So I would like to ask, where can people find your work if we're eagerly awaiting your next book?
Okay.
Where can people find you?
Sure. My books, or the ebook specifically, is on Amazon, and paperbacks are pretty much everywhere. You can go on Barnes and Noble, you can go on Amazon, also indiebound.org if you want to support your favorite indie bookstore. You can put in the bookstore and then you can purchase it through them. What was the other question? Sorry.
Where can people find you and updates about you?
Oh yes, sorry. I have a website, lindasmolkin.com. You can go there. I have an author page on Facebook. And I spend, actually, out of all the social media places, I spend most of the time on Instagram, and I'm at Linda Smolkin, and I will usually put all my updates on books there as well. And one thing else I wanted to mention, I thank everybody in advance for the support and for reading my books. It's really awesome, and I really appreciate it. If for some reason you can't afford to buy it, but what's very beneficial to you, your community, even to your author, is you can go to your library. You can either go inside to the information desk or on their website and ask for my books or any author's books to be added to their collection, because then they'll consider it and then they'll add it to the collection, and you can read it and other people can read it. And the author benefits too. So either Amazon or any bookstore, or through your library, if you don't find it in their collection, you can request it.
Yes, and you can find Linda's books at Duncan and at Beatley. And of course, you can place holds on those and get those sent to any of the branches. So please, if you haven't read any of Linda's stuff, I highly recommend go to your local library and pick up a copy of one of her books. I really enjoyed Among the Branded.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Linda, for joining us on Monday. And thank you to the audience for spending their Monday with us. My next event will be on Wednesday, when Yoga and Daily Life will join us for monthly meditation. It's a free meditation class sponsored by the Friends of Duncan Library. We'd love to have you all there for an hour of peace and mind clearing as you sit down to write the next chapter of your book. Any final words for our audience, Linda?
No, just thank you. And I just want to say, was it Colleen who had the question about if you know her personally, she can reach out to you and we can connect, and I'm happy to help her a little bit more with the, editing advice. But for those who are wanting to write, I just said, if you have a story to tell, you should tell it. It's important.
All right. Thank you so much, and have a good night.
Thank you. Bye, everybody.